morning. How are you, Mr. Earl? Good morning. All right, I've had an opportunity to review the motion that was made yesterday afternoon. I will comment that, of course, the main thrust of the case is the question of the severance agreement and whether or not it should be, vote should be upheld. I reviewed the Baird case. I've also reviewed the cases that were submitted previously and from other jurisdictions that weigh on that particular issue. I do find that there are certain questions of the law in this state that were not exactly clear given the facts in this case. We have a series of votes that were taken here, some of which were by a wide margin, one of which was not by a wide margin. It was a single vote margin. And whether or not that has some effect on this case is a question of some novel import or novel discussion in this state. Also, as to what votes should be or shouldn't be invalidated is also a question that's up for interpretation. All of those are issues that I don't think should be decided in some type of summary fashion. I believe that they should be settled, decided on a complete record, so that all the facts can be preserved for an appellate court later on when I've got a feeling this case will be decided by an appellate court. So I want a full record developed before I make a ruling on any of the issues in the case. So for that reason, I'm denying the motion for directed verdict at this point in time, and we'll proceed with the defense case. Davis, you ready to call your first witness?
Yes, Your Honor. This morning, please the court, we are going to do a series of designations.
Yes.
I spoke with opposing counsel just a minute ago, and they do have some objections to designations and also with respect to exhibits from the depositions, but we propose to handle it like we had handled the prior depositions, which is go ahead and read everything that's designated, provide you with a list of objections, and
All right.
the court consider that.
Any objection to proceeding then?
No, Your Honor, I think Mr. Davis just needs to let us know about a couple of objections on one of them.
Right.
So the first one, as I understand, Your Honor, is Mr. Allen. And if I can hand him up, I'll just give you out.
Yes, that'd be fine. Thank you very much. Do I have your proposed designations on that?
Yes, sir, Your Honor, they're included in that same document.
I have defendants' designations for Cindy Wilson. I have the designations for Edward Moore.
I had left them on the bench yesterday, so I can get you a copy of them shortly, and I also have a key for you.
And you can approach one.
That is sort of the Rosetta Stone between the deposition exhibit numbers and the trial exhibit numbers, so it allows you to switch back and forth.
Okay. That's good. Oh, he may have.
Yeah, I had left the other two yesterday, but I'll get you another copy. They should be in my box. I think I don't know, did the opposing counsel hand you up the objections to the deposition?
Yes, well, I now have Allen's. I gave some things back to Mr. Shirley, so I'm a little confused. This is plaintiff's objections to Allen. I have that. And these are your designations.
Right.
I have those two documents read out.
But what I would say is that Allen, for example, the designations, objections, and county designations should all be in one.
I see. Okay. Thank you very much. Keep those All right,
argument.
so this is the deposition of Tom Allen, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
You may proceed.
Can you state your full name for the record?
It's Thomas Allen, middle name is Fulton.
Mr. Allen, where were you born?
Chillicothe, Ohio?
And did you grow up in Ohio?
Yes.
At what point did you move to South Carolina?
That was back in 1997.
What brought you to South Carolina?
My wife,
What's your wife's name?
Janice.
Are you currently married?
Yes.
How long have you been married to Janice?
20 years.
Tell me a little bit about yourself. Where did you go to college?
Went to Ohio University for my bachelor's degree and went to East Tennessee State for my master's degree. Served 2 years in the Air Force, 68 through 70, as an English instructor in Vietnam. Got out of there and had a 5-year gap in service. That's when I went back and got my master's degree, which was in environmental health. And at that time, that's when the Clean Air, Clean Water Act and all that stuff was coming into being in the early and mid-70s. So as it turned out, an Army recruiter was coming through the university because they needed people to clean up a lot of messes that the Army had managed to generate over the years. And they're recruiting folks, taking them in on direct commissions as officers. So they asked me if I wanted to do that, and I said absolutely. I enjoyed the Air Force and had a great time. Spent another 20 years in the Army. So total about 22 and a half years altogether in the military.
What was your ultimate rank?
Lieutenant Colonel.
Earlier you testified that you received a bachelor's from Ohio University.
Ohio University.
And what was your bachelor's in?
Botany.
Turn your attention to the lawsuit between Anderson County and Mr. Preston. When did you first take office in Anderson?
January 09.
January 09. And were you elected in the previous primary?
That's correct, in November of 08.
November of 08? Was that a contested, that was the general election.
It was the general.
Was it a contested general election?
No.
And when was the primary?
Primary was the previous June.
Who did you run against in the primary?
In that primary, it was Bill McAfee.
What districts do you represent?
4.
And help me out as a non-Anderson County person. What does District 4 embrace?
District 4 is the northern part of the county. It runs almost from the Georgia line across the northern part of the lakes up against Oconee and Pickens County. And if on the map here, we're going to go from Georgia across the northern part of the country, and it makes a curve and come down through Sandy Springs, Pendleton, Harper's Ridge, and actually crossed over 81 and encompassed Hannah High School in just a little pie-shaped piece out of Midway Road. So primarily the northern section around the lake.
During the primary election in June of 2008, were there any other new council members elected?
Yes.
Who else was elected?
We had Mr. Dunn in District 5 and Mr. Moore in District 3.
Was Mr. Dunn challenged in the general election?
Not in the general election.
Was Mr. Moore challenged in the general election?
Not in the general.
So after the primary in June of 2008, yourself, Mr. Dunn, and Mr. Moore pretty much had secured your seats on county council?
Right.
When you ran for county council, do you recall stating that you ran for the District 4 seat because you wanted to see the council spending more time on county business and less time fighting with each other?
I don't recall saying that. I don't recall that specifically. I could have, but I don't recall. Would that have been back in 2008?
Yes, sir.
It's possible I could have said that. I don't recall it. If I had said that in an interview or a debate or, I don't know.
Was it true?
That would probably be part of the reason. There was a lot of discord on council. Yeah, there was a lot of discord.
Did you ever post on the Anderson Talk Zone under a name other than your own?
I did.
What other screen name did you use?
That was Killed Kenny.
Do you ever recall posting on the Anderson Talk Zone that part of the reason why that you were running for the District 4 seat was because you wanted to end the bickering and contentiousness that was associated with Anderson County politics?
I may have said that. I may have, and that would tie in with this, because like I said, there was a lot of contention.
You believe that was true?
Yes.
Was that part of the reason why you ran for the District 4 seat?
Yes.
Was your goal to limit the contentiousness?
Yes.
Was Tommy Dunn successful in his run for the District 5 seat?
Yes.
Who did he beat?
There may have been only one, but I can't recall the name of those folks.
Was it Michael Thompson?
Yes, I think it was that.
Do you recall when Anderson County Council voted to pursue this lawsuit?
Yes.
Did you cast a vote on whether the county should bring this lawsuit?
Yes.
What was your vote?
Against.
Why did you vote against it?
Having looked at the lawsuit, it's just my personal opinion. The reason the suit was being brought, I believe, is there was a lot of pressure from certain sources to get the $1.1 million back that they opted to Mr. Preston. In my looking at the lawsuit, I just didn't feel like that was going to be objective.
Were you concerned that the lawsuit would not be a successful way to recover the $1.1 million?
Well, I don't know, because that really is going to have to be up to the court to determine whether it is or not. Not being an attorney, in my humble opinion, I didn't look like it was going to achieve that goal. However, I don't know what might be brought out or discovered or followed, once it got in the court system. I don't know.
You mentioned pressure from certain sources. What sources are you referring to?
Well, there was a lot of individuals, certain segments of the population, that just were really, really upset about the $1.1 million buyout and felt like the county just absolutely had to get the money back. We're very upset about it. And that came from various segments of the population.
Can you identify for me the individuals that you recall as being the most upset?
Well, the most vocal of the whole operation came out of a local radio station, which was WAIM Radio. I mean, that was a major topic of a call-in talk show. That was a major topic for a long time, and they seemed to be extremely concerned about that and wanted to get their money back.
Was there a particular radio personality that you were referring to?
Well, it's the Rick Driver show. Everybody knows what that is. That's no secret. But it was his callers, folks that would call in.
Over the years, have you had contact with Mr. Driver?
Yes.
Have you ever called into the radio show yourself?
Yes.
Do you know whether Mr. Moore frequently had contact with Mr. Driver?
I believe that he did. I don't know how frequent it was, but him being a talk show host and county council seemingly to be his primary meat on the show, he's talked to everybody on council.
How about Miss Wilson? Does she regularly talk to Mr. Driver?
I would imagine she does. I'm not certain how often they might talk.
How about Councilman or Councilwoman Floyd? Does she talk to Mr. Driver regularly?
I rather doubt that she does.
How about former Councilman Ron Wilson? Did he talk to Mr. Driver regularly?
From the history I know there, that was kind of an interesting relationship. I think they did initially, and then they had a falling out. So how frequently they spoke to one another, I don't know. Initially, when Ron Wilson ran for office, I presume they talked quite a bit. But after a while, the wheels fell off that relationship, and I don't know what their...
What's your understanding was the reason why their relationship deteriorated?
Just my opinion why it deteriorated? I think Rick Driver and the show, that's a very conservative group, and Ron Wilson wasn't right on that very conservative pathway. And I think that's what's caused the falling out. He was not conservative enough.
Isn't Mr. Wilson pretty conservative?
He is.
Just not conservative enough.
Not conservative enough.
Are you conservative enough for the Rick Driver crowd?
No.
Did the county ever vote later, as in after the lawsuit was filed, concerning contributing additional resources to this lawsuit?
There were several votes taken where monies would be transferred from one department to another for legal fees. Yes.
Did you ever vote against any of those transfers?
Yes.
How many did you vote against?
Oh, at least 2.
Why did you vote against them?
Well, I just couldn't see any end to it. It looked like a never-ending rat hole, so to speak. Or just, money flowing out, and we weren't seeing any results. It's been 2 years now, over 2 years, and we're still paying bills.
To date, how much has the Anderson County Council paid in relation to the investigation in this lawsuit?
I don't know the exact number. We keep seeing in the newspaper somewhere between 1.5, 1.6 million. I think it's more than that. I would have to get with the finance department and get a current number. It's probably, I say, closer to 2.
How much was the total amount paid out to Mr. Preston in his severance?
How much was paid out?
Yes, sir.
1.1.
Are you fiscally conservative?
Yes.
Is it fiscally conservative to spend over $1.5 million chasing $1.1 million?
If you give me a $10 bill and I guarantee you to get you 5 back, will that be a good deal? No.
On the second page of Exhibit 1, in the second paragraph down, it says, in the last real sentence, we've got to get the gulf healed before we can move forward, end quote. Do you see that?
Yes.
What gulf are you referring to?
Let me read that again. Okay. This was when I was out doing door-to-door campaigning. That was one of the biggest complaints that I heard was again, going back to the front page, the arguments, the disruption on council, the discord on council. And that's what I meant by the gulf. There was so much arguing. I mean, it got pretty brutal sometimes on council. And that's what I was hearing most of when I'd go door to door.
Was it your experience that the Anderson citizens were informing you that they were upset about the discord on the Anderson County Council?
Yes.
Does this lawsuit further the healing of the gulf, in your opinion?
No.
Is it your personal opinion that the county should continue to spend money on this lawsuit?
It is my opinion that the county should continue money on this lawsuit? No.
Is this lawsuit good for the citizens of Anderson County? In your opinion, is this lawsuit good for the citizens of Anderson County?
In my opinion, no.
Is the economic development important for Anderson County?
Very much so. That's one of my priorities.
Is the money that the county expends on this lawsuit money that it could otherwise spend on economic development?
It might be. And I would say again, and I say might because I don't know what pot it's coming out of. Some things are locked in, as you probably know. You can only use it for certain things, and it may be that some of this money can only be used for legal activities. There are other pots of money that, yes, it conceivably can be used to develop infrastructure, repave roads, and do some things that would be beneficial to economic development.
Do you recall stating when you were running for office that economic development was one of the most important issues for your district?
I probably did say that. I don't recall the specific statement, but yeah.
Putting aside whether you specifically recall that, is that true?
Yes.
Is your email address thomas9976@charter.net?
Yes, it is.
Did you ever meet with Mr. Hopkins prior to your being sworn in January of 2009?
I believe we did, yeah. The 3 of us new council members visited a number of various divisions just so we could be familiar with them. And of course, roads and bridges was one, so yes.
Who attended that meeting? Was it you, Mr. Moore, Mr. Dunn?
And that was it.
And then whoever the department person was?
Mr. Hopkins, for instance, right.
Did you meet with anyone other than Mr. Hopkins and Mr. Jones?
I think we met with, trying to remember back now, I think Mr. Carroll's office, purchasing, we stopped in there. Trying to remember where else we might have gone. That's the only one I can recall right now, Mr. Hopkins, Mr. Carroll.
And what was discussed during these meetings?
Oh my goodness. Basically just how they operated in their budgets, and I'll use Mr. Hopkins as an example because I remember that one a little bit better. We went down to his office and we discussed how he was funded, the kind of money he had, how much he had for paving and asphalt and grass cutting. We walked outside the door and looked at some of the equipment that they had parked out in the lot. Went over to the vehicle maintenance facility so we could see how the vehicles were maintained and cared for, and looked at some of the cost involved over there. Just general things, how the division ran basically.
Down at the bottom of that paragraph, the second to last sentence, Mr. Beckwith writes to you, and I quote, "Once you are sworn in, they apparently require to keep J. Preston informed of any council interaction," end quote. Do you see that?
Uh-huh.
Was the purpose of your meeting with Mr. Hopkins and Mr. Jones before you were sworn in to avoid having to disclose the meetings to the county administrator?
You know what? That never would have occurred to me, so I'll say no. I would never even assume that. The obvious thing for us to do is obviously newly elected. Well, not the general election yet, but since there was nobody running against us, the obvious thing to do is try to get up to snuff, get up to speed on what's going on. It would never occur to me that there was some kind of, thing that there would have to be reported to Mr. Preston after we were sworn in versus not reported before we were sworn in. That would never occur to me.
Do you recall ever informing Mr. Preston that you were meeting with Mr. Hopkins?
No.
Do you recall informing Mr. Preston that you were meeting with Mr. Jones?
No.
Did you meet with Mr. Jones?
I believe we did meet Mr. Jones.
Do you recall ever telling Mr. Preston that you met with Mr. Jones?
No.
And you referenced a Mr. Carroll before as well. Do you remember Mr. Carroll?
Yeah.
You met with Mr. Carroll?
Uh-huh.
Did you ever tell Mr. Preston that you met with Mr. Carroll?
No.
Do you have, to your knowledge, did anyone tell Mr. Preston about those meetings?
No, not to my knowledge.
Were you aware of any policies in place that Mr. Preston, as county administrator, had in relation to meetings between county council members and employees of the county?
No.
Before being sworn in January of 2009, did you meet with Mr. Moore and Mr. Dunn about county council business?
Prior to the swearing in?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
How many meetings took place?
I would guess maybe 4 or 5, somewhere in that neighborhood.
Is it possible that you met more than 5 times?
It's possible. I don't recall exactly.
But you recall meeting with a fair amount of regularity.
Yes.
Where did the meetings take place?
They took place over in Bob Waldrop's office.
Did they only take place at Bob Waldrop's office?
Yes, that was the only place.
Did you ever meet at Cindy Wilson's home?
There was a meeting at Cindy Wilson's house, yes.
Were there any other meetings?
You may be telling me because I can't recall if there were. I know they were at Waldrop's office. There was one at Cindy's house.
Let's talk about the meetings at Bob Waldrop's office. When you say his office, do you mean his law office?
His law office, yeah.
And where did you meet in his law office?
In his conference room.
Why did you meet at Mr. Waldrop's office?
Well, he asked us if we would like to meet at his office, and so we did. To me, going over there was, honestly, it was kind of a training thing because the 3 of us were brand new coming into council. We didn't know the inner workings of how things worked or whatever. There were some people that were willing to help us get our feet wet, find out how council works, so that's why we had our meetings.
Prior to the primary in June of 2008, do you recall writing that your intention was not to pick sides in the Anderson County political divisiveness?
Did I wrote that?
Yes, sir.
It sounds like something